My world collapsed when I found out about my wife's affair. All her work dinners turned out to be excuses for something far more sinister. The lies, the betrayal, it was like a knife to my heart. The evidence came in waves, the unexplained charges, the late nights, and finally, the photos. The moment I opened that manila envelope, everything I believed in shattered. I knew then that my life would never be the same, but I wasn't going down quietly. I had a plan, and it started with packing her things and changing the locks. But before we dive deeper into this story, let me know where you're watching this from in the comments below. And if you enjoy stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on future updates. Let's get started. Linda sat at the kitchen table, her fingers tracing the rim of her now empty coffee cup. The faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old house were the only sounds around her, amplifying the heavy silence. It was early evening and the fading sunlight cast long shadows across the room. The kids were at the neighbor's house, thankfully staying overnight. At least they wouldn't have to witness what Linda feared would soon unfold. Her chest felt tight, her breath shallow as she stared at the clock on the wall. Any moment now, Jim would return. She had tried rehearsing what she needed to say, but the words refused to come together in her mind. They felt foreign, inadequate to express the tangled mess she had created. A cold sweat broke out on her forehead as she imagined his reaction, the inevitable yelling, the hurt in his eyes. She had never seen him truly angry before, and the thought terrified her. Linda's gaze dropped to her hands, trembling slightly against the table. How had it come to this? She had always seen herself as a good wife, a good mother. A little flirting at work, a few lunches with a charming co-worker. It had felt harmless at first, even fun. But somewhere along the way, the line between innocent and wrong blurred, and before she realized it, she had crossed into a territory she never thought she'd find herself in. She clenched her fists, willing herself to stay calm. The truth couldn't wait any longer. For over a month, she had known something was wrong, but the test she'd taken a week ago confirmed it. Tonight, she would tell Jim everything. The knot in her stomach tightened as she heard the faint sound of a car pulling into the driveway. The rumble of a truck outside broke the stillness, pulling Linda from her spiraling thoughts. Frowning, she stood and moved toward the window, parting the curtain just enough to glimpse the large moving truck parked in the driveway. Her heart skipped. She wasn't expecting anyone, especially not a moving company. Her first thought was that they had the wrong house. As the doorbell chimed, Linda hesitated for a moment, a sinking feeling settling in her stomach. Steeling herself, she opened the door to a man in a uniform, clipboard in hand. "Amaranth, Linda Gardner?" he asked, glancing at a piece of paper before meeting her eyes. "Yes," she replied cautiously. "Can I help you?" "I have an order to pack up your things and move them to Southwest 10th Avenue, the man said briskly. Linda blinked, confusion clouding her face. There must be some mistake. "I didn't place any such order." The man, unbothered by her reaction, flipped the clipboard toward her, revealing a signature at the bottom of the form. "The order was placed by a Mr. Jim Gardner last week," he explained. "This is his signature, ma'am." Her breath caught in her throat, her mind racing. Jim had done this? Before she could fully process the information, the man continued. "If you try to stop me, I was told to give you this." He handed her a large manila envelope, then barked instructions to the men in the truck to start unloading. Trembling, Linda tore open the envelope, her eyes scanning the contents. It didn't take long to realize the truth. Jim knew. Not just the pregnancy, but everything. Her affair, her betrayal. The proof was undeniable, and his intentions were painfully clear. Almost on autopilot, Linda looked up at the man. Her voice barely above a whisper, she said, "The first room at the top of the stairs, on the right." The movers began their work as she stood frozen in place, clutching the envelope. Shock gave way to confusion, then to a gnawing dread. Questions buzzed in her head, but the clearest thought was also the most terrifying. Jim wasn't coming back. As the workers moved around her, Linda sank into the nearest chair. overwhelmed. The life she had known was being packed into boxes, piece by piece, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Linda stood frozen at the edge of the kitchen, watching as the movers carried box after box down the stairs. Each thud of footsteps and creak of furniture being shifted felt like a blow to her chest. Her home, the space she had built and filled with memories, was being dismantled piece by piece, right before her eyes. And she could do nothing but stand there, clutching the envelope that had shattered her life. The muffled voices of the movers filtered through the fog in her mind. Occasionally, one would pause to ask her a question. "Do you want this packed separately?" Or, "Where should this go?" But her responses were barely audible. She couldn't summon the strength to care about the details. Her body moved mechanically, pointing when prompted, but her mind was far away, spiraling into disbelief and regret. "This can't be happening," she whispered to herself, her voice trembling. Her hands gripped the back of a chair, as if holding onto it could somehow ground her. But nothing felt solid anymore. The reality of her choices, the cascade of consequences, was overwhelming. The rumble of another vehicle outside jolted her from her daze. Moments later, her father Ken appeared at the door. His face was lined with concern, his movements deliberate as he stepped inside and took in the scene. "Sweetheart," he said gently, his voice steady but strained. He walked over to her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Your mother is waiting for us at home. The movers will finish packing your things. Let me take you there." Linda looked up at him, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "Dad, Her voice broke, and she shook her head, unable to form the words. "This can't be happening." Ken's expression softened, but there was a sadness in his eyes that mirrored her own. "I know, Linda," he said quietly. "But Jim asked me to come. He didn't think you'd be able to drive after everything." His words carried no judgment, only a quiet understanding, but they cut deeper than any reprimand could have. Linda nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her father's support and the shame of needing it. She followed him toward the door, glancing back one last time at the half-empty living room. The sight broke something inside her. "I ruined everything, didn't I?" she murmured, more to herself than to her father. Ken paused, looking at her with a mix of compassion and firmness. "We all make mistakes, Linda. What matters now is how you handle what comes next." He guided her out to the car, his hand steady on her arm, as though afraid she might collapse under the weight of it all. As she slid into the passenger seat, Linda closed her eyes, the sound of the mover's footsteps fading behind her. The guilt and despair were suffocating, but beneath it all, a new fear began to stir. What would she do now? Jim stared at the clinic bill on his desk, the bold, itemized charges glaring back at him. A routine checkup and a B12 shot, Linda had said. But the charge for a pregnancy test was unmistakable. His stomach churned, a sinking realization taking hold. He set the bill down, his hands trembling slightly, and leaned back in his chair. His mind raced, searching for explanations, anything but the one that had begun to solidify in his thoughts. "She wouldn't," he murmured to himself, though the growing knot in his chest suggested otherwise. The memory of his vasectomy resurfaced, a deliberate decision they had made together to avoid future surprises after their second child. That procedure was supposed to eliminate any possibility of this scenario. So why? Why would Linda need a pregnancy test? The questions plagued him through the night, robbing him of sleep. By morning, he decided he needed answers. He picked up the phone and called a private investigator, his voice tight as he explained the situation. "I don't want to believe it," he said, "but I need to know the truth." The next few days were excruciating. He tried to act normal around Linda and the kids, but every smile, every glance felt forced. His heart clenched each time he saw her, a mixture of love, doubt, and anger warring within him. When the investigator finally called with the results, the confirmation hit him like a sledgehammer. Photos, receipts, and reports, all irrefutable proof of her betrayal. Linda had been meeting another man, David. Under the guise of work events and lunches, the betrayal was complete. Jim sat alone in his office that evening, the evidence spread out before him. He didn't cry, he didn't yell, he simply stared at the photos, his mind cold and calculating. The anger was there, a simmering rage beneath the surface, but it was tempered by a sense of clarity. His marriage was over. Now it was time to act. By the next morning, Jim had a plan. He called a locksmith, his voice steady as he made the request. "I need all the locks changed, including the garage door code. Leave me 5 sets of keys." There was no hesitation in his tone, no wavering. His decision was final. He then contacted a moving company, scheduling 2 crews to handle Linda's belongings. He went over every detail with precision, ensuring the timeline was airtight. When the movers arrived, he gave simple instructions. "Pack up everything in the master bedroom. I'll direct you if anything is unclear. Leave me 5 sets of keys when you're done." As the day progressed, Jim felt the weight of his choices pressing down on him. He didn't take pleasure in any of it. This wasn't about revenge. It was about regaining control of a life that had been upended by someone he trusted most. When the movers finished, Jim stood in the now empty bedroom. The space felt hollow, much like his heart. Yet, he felt a flicker of resolve. He wasn't just doing this for himself. He was doing it for their daughters, for the stability they deserved. "This is how it has to be," he muttered to himself, his voice firm. Turning away, he left the room, ready to face whatever came next. The diner was dimly lit, with the low hum of conversations and the occasional clink of silverware filling the air. Outside, parked in the far corner of the lot, Jim sat in his car, watching his 3 closest friends approach David, who had just emerged from the restaurant. David looked uneasy from the start, his steps faltering as he noticed the 3 men closing in on him. Jim stayed back, letting them handle the confrontation. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white, as he watched the scene unfold. His availability was just as limited. Bob, the largest of the group, spoke first. His tone was calm, but there was a dangerous edge to it. "David Collins, right?" David hesitated, his eyes darting between them. "Yeah." "Can I help you?" Bob smirked, leaning in just enough to make David step back. "Help us? No. But we're here to help you understand a few things." David's face paled and he glanced around, clearly searching for an escape route, but the other 2 men, Mike and Greg, stepped in, cutting off his path. "Look," David stammered, his voice shaking, I don't want any trouble." "Trouble?" Bob raised an eyebrow, pulling out a pocket knife and flipping it open with a sharp click. "Trouble is what you've brought on yourself, buddy. Now here's the deal. You've got 24 hours to pack up and leave this town. Disappear. Because if you're still here tomorrow, let's just say you'll be leaving in a much more painful way." David's breath quickened, his eyes wide as he took a step back. I didn't mean for any of this to happen," he stammered. "Doesn't matter what you meant," Greg interjected. "What matters is what you did. Jim's our friend, and you've disrespected him in a way we can't let slide." Bob leaned closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "We know where you live, where you work, and every place you like to hang out. Do the smart thing and disappear." David nodded frantically, sweat beading on his forehead. All right. I'll leave. I swear." Bob straightened, closing the knife with a snap. "Good. Don't make us come looking for you." With that, the group stepped back, letting David scramble to his car and speed off into the night. Jim watched from a distance, his emotions a chaotic mix of satisfaction, anger, and sadness. When Bob walked over to his car, Jim rolled down the window. "Done," Bob said simply. "He knows what's good for him." Jim nodded, his voice low and weary. "Thanks. I'll be better tomorrow." Bob placed a reassuring hand on the car door. "You've got this, man. We're here for you." Jim nodded again, watching his friends walk away. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to feel the support they offered, but the ache in his chest remained. Tomorrow might be better, but tonight, the weight of betrayal still loomed heavy. Linda sat in the back seat of her father's car, the hum of the engine and the faint rustle of passing trees blending into a white noise that mirrored the chaos in her mind. Her thoughts drifted uncontrollably, pulling her back to the beginning, when everything had seemed so harmless. It started with David's first day at the office. He had a disarming smile, a way of making everyone feel at ease. Linda had been assigned to help him settle in, show him the ropes. At the time, it felt like nothing more than her duty. She remembered the easy conversations, their shared love of Mexican food, and his knack for making her laugh. When the day felt long, he was charming, yes, but so were many others. What harm could come from a little friendly banter? But the lunches began to stretch longer. He would save her a seat at meetings, walk with her to her car after work. The little things piled up, each one innocuous on its own, but together they created a bridge she never intended to cross. Linda clenched her hands in her lap, the weight of those memories pressing down on her. She hadn't seen the line until it was far behind her. The first moment she truly faltered played vividly in her mind. It was at a team-building seminar, the music playing softly in the background as David extended a hand to her. "Dance with me," he'd asked, his voice warm and inviting. She had hesitated, but the room was filled with coworkers, and it felt innocent enough. When his hand touched her waist, a spark she hadn't felt in years. That night, she had gone home to Jim, desperate to convince herself it was nothing. She tried to drown the guilt in the familiarity of her husband's arms, but the spark lingered, burning at the edges of her resolve. She didn't know it then, but she had already opened a door she couldn't close. The weeks that followed blurred together. Happy hours after work, stolen glances, lingering touches. She remembered the first kiss, the way it had both thrilled and terrified her. "This isn't me," she had whispered to herself afterward, tears streaming down her face in the privacy of her car. And yet the pull toward David only grew stronger. Linda's chest tightened as she recalled the nights they spent in hotel rooms, the excuses she made to Jim about late meetings or traffic delays. Each lie felt heavier than the last, yet she carried them anyway, telling herself that what she and David had was temporary, that it didn't define her. But deep down, she knew it wasn't true. The guilt gnawed at her, a constant shadow that loomed even in her happiest moments. She tried to rationalize it. Jim had grown distant, their marriage felt stagnant. She deserved to feel alive again. But now, sitting in the car with her father driving silently beside her, those excuses felt hollow. Her eyes filled with tears as she finally faced the truth. She had been selfish. She had traded years of trust and love for fleeting moments of excitement, and now everything she had taken for granted was gone. Linda pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle a sob, the weight of regret suffocating her. "I thought I could handle it," she whispered, more to herself than to her father. "I thought I could stop." Hen glanced at her briefly, his face etched with worry but also quiet disappointment. "We all think that until it's too late," he said softly. Linda turned to look out the window, the landscape blurring through her tears. She couldn't take back what she had done, but for the first time, she began to fully grasp the depth of her betrayal, and with it, the realization that she might never be able to repair what was lost. Jim sat in the lawyer's office, his jaw clenched, and his hands resting firmly on the polished oak table. The air in the room was cool, the hum of the overhead fan barely audible. Drafts of divorce filings, asset lists, and custody agreements. His lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia, watched him closely, her pen poised over her notebook. "I want this done quickly," Jim said, his voice low but firm. 50-50 split of assets. No alimony. and I get full custody of the kids. Linda can have visitation, but she doesn't live with them. That's non-negotiable." Patricia nodded, adjusting her glasses. "The 50/50 split won't be an issue, but custody might be contested. Are you prepared to prove her unfitness as a parent?" Jim let out a bitter laugh. "I have all the proof I need," he said, sliding an envelope across the table. Inside were surveillance photos, receipts, and the pregnancy test results. "She's carrying someone else's child. My kids will not be raised in a house where they'll watch their mother build a life with the man she betrayed me with." Patricia opened the envelope and glanced at the contents, her expression remaining neutral but professional. "This will hold up in court," she said. "But if her lawyer challenges custody, it could get messy." Jim leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Fight me on this," he said, his voice steady but laced with steel, "and I'll make sure the whole world knows exactly what kind of person she is. I'm not bluffing, Patricia." Patricia met his gaze, nodding. "Understood. I'll draft the papers immediately and file for a restraining order to keep her away from the house until this is finalized." The following day, the papers were served to Linda at her parents' home. Jim didn't want to see her reaction, but he imagined the shock and anger on her face. He had already changed the locks on the house and canceled their joint accounts. Every step was calculated to sever their lives cleanly, leaving no room for lingering ties. Later that week, Jim met Linda and her lawyer in a sterile conference room at Patricia's firm. Linda looked pale, her eyes rimmed red, but there was a hint of defiance in her posture. Her lawyer, a young man with a confident smirk, wasted no time. "We're just getting started," he said. "Where are you going?" when Jim abruptly stood. Jim turned, his expression cold. "I'll say this once," he began, his voice calm but deadly. "The terms are non-negotiable. Linda sees the kids, but I have custody. Push this, and I'll take this public. Everything. Do you want that?" The room fell silent. Linda's lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his confidence visibly shaken. Linda lowered her gaze, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Fine," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I agree." Jim sat back down, his heart heavy but resolute. Signing the papers felt like the final nail in the coffin of their marriage. As he left the office, he glanced at Linda one last time. Her face was a mixture of sorrow and guilt, but Jim felt no sympathy. "This is the end," he muttered to himself as he walked out into the sunlight. For the first time in weeks, he felt the faint stirrings of relief. The battle was over, but the healing had just begun. Jim sat on the living room couch, his daughters, Emma and Lily, on either side of him. Their small faces were filled with curiosity and a hint of worry as they sensed the seriousness of their father's tone. The room was quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Donna stood in the doorway, her presence a silent reassurance, her arms crossed protectively as she watched her brother prepare to have one of the hardest conversations of his life. Jim took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain calm. His heart ached at the thought of what he was about to say, but he knew his girls deserved the truth, or at least as much of it as they could understand. "Girls," he began, his voice soft but steady, "I need to talk to you about something important." Emma, the older of the two at 9, tilted her head, her eyes searching his face. "What is it, Daddy? Did we do something wrong?" Jim shook his head quickly, his hand gently brushing her hair. "No, sweetheart. You and Lily didn't do anything wrong. This is about me and your mom." At the mention of their mother, Lily, only 6, clutched a stuffed bunny tightly to her chest. "Is Mommy okay?" she asked in a small voice. Jim swallowed the lump in his throat. "She's okay," he assured them. "But your mom and I have been having some problems, and we've decided that she's not going to live here with us anymore." Too loud and slightly panicked by her mom's concern, Jim exerted himself not to cry, and the mother gathered him close. Both girls stared at him, their expressions shifting from confusion to sadness. Emma's voice trembled as she asked, "Is it because you don't love each other anymore?" Jim hesitated, his heart breaking at the question. Sometimes, grown-ups have trouble getting along, even when they try very hard, he explained carefully. But that doesn't mean we don't both love you very much. You're the most important thing to both of us. Lily's eyes welled with tears. Will we still see Mommy? Jim pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. Of course you will, he said firmly. You can see her whenever you want. She loves you, and I'll make sure you get to spend time with her. Donna stepped forward then, kneeling in front of the girls. Her smile was warm, but her eyes mirrored Jim's pain. And I'll be here to help too, she said. I'm going to stay with you for a while, so we can all figure things out together. How does that sound? Emma glanced between her father and her aunt, her voice cautious. Will you stay in my room, Aunt Donna? Donna laughed softly, ruffling her niece's hair. No, sweetie. I'll take the guest room. But I'll be close by if you ever need me. Jim felt a flicker of relief at Donna's presence. She had stepped in without hesitation, her unwavering support a lifeline in the chaos. We're going to be okay, Jim told his daughters, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. It might feel different for a while, but we'll figure it out. Together. The girls nodded slowly, their tears giving way to tentative acceptance. As they cuddled close to him, Jim held them tightly, silently vowing to be everything they needed. Despite the pain of the past weeks, this moment, grounded in love and honesty, was a step toward healing. The air in the lawyer's office was thick with tension, the kind that felt almost suffocating. Linda sat across from Jim, her hands clenched together on the polished table. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen from days of crying. Jim, on the other hand, sat rigidly, his gaze fixed on the stack of papers in front of him. His expression was calm but cold, his resolve etched into every line of his face. The lawyer spoke in measured tones, explaining the terms of the divorce for what felt like the 100th time. Linda barely registered the words. They were just background noise to the weight in her chest. When the lawyer handed her a pen, her fingers trembled as she reached for it. I'll sign, Linda said softly, her voice barely audible. She hesitated, looking up at Jim. But before I do, I need to say something. Jim didn't respond immediately. He leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed, waiting. His silence was more damning than any words he could have spoken. I've always loved only you, Linda began, her voice cracking. Tears spilled over as she continued. I made a terrible mistake, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But please believe me, Jim. You were always the only one. Jim's eyes met hers, hard and unyielding. He let her words hang in the air for a moment before responding. His tone measured but sharp. I guess not enough. Linda flinched as though the words were a physical blow. She looked down, a fresh wave of tears blurring her vision. She signed the papers with shaking hands, the sound of the pen scratching across the paper seeming to echo in the silent room. As Jim stood to leave, he gathered the documents without glancing at her. At the door, he paused and turned slightly. Since you and David seemed to hit it off so well at those team-building events, maybe you can call it a workplace injury. The remark was cutting, delivered with the kind of precision that left no room for misinterpretation. Linda's sobs filled the room as Jim walked out, letting the door close softly behind him. For him, it was over. For her, it was the beginning of a life shaped by her choices and their consequences. Linda sat on the edge of her childhood bed, staring out the window of her parents' house. The world outside seemed unchanged. Birds chirped, cars passed, life went on. But her world had crumbled, and the weight of her choices pressed down like a heavy shroud. She traced the frame of an old photo on the nightstand, one of her and Jim on their wedding day, their smiles radiant with hope and love. How had she let it slip away? She replayed every moment in her mind. The flirtations, the stolen glances, the nights she thought no one would find out. The spark she'd chased now felt like ash in her hands, and the price she'd paid was far greater than she ever imagined. She'd lost her marriage, her home, and most painfully, the unwavering trust of her daughters. They had hugged her during visits, but looked at her differently now, their innocent eyes asking questions they didn't yet know how to voice. Tears welled in her eyes. "I did this," she whispered, the words a bitter mantra. The consequences of her actions stretched before her like an endless road, and she knew there was no going back. Across town, Jim stood in the kitchen, pouring cereal into bowls for Emma and Lily. The morning was chaotic as always. Lily couldn't find her favorite hair clip, and Emma was debating whether her socks matched. Despite the noise, Jim felt a strange sense of calm. Donna was at the counter packing school lunches, humming softly. Her presence had been a godsend, a steady hand when he'd felt like he was drowning. He watched his daughters laughing, their voices filling the house with life. For the first time in weeks, Jim smiled, a genuine smile. This was his new reality, a single father navigating uncharted waters. But he wasn't alone, and he wasn't broken. His resolve to create a stable, loving home for Emma and Lily gave him purpose. As the girls grabbed their backpacks and dashed for the door, Jim paused for a moment, watching them. They were his anchor, his reason to move forward. The pain of betrayal still lingered, but in their laughter and the quiet support of Donna, he found solace and hope for the future.